What happens when the toughest Marines in the Corps meet someone they think is just another recruit trying to prove herself? What happens when their jokes and laughter turn into stunned silence? What happens when the person they've been mocking casually mentions her real job title? This isn't just another military story. This is about assumptions that cost careers, about respect that must be earned twice, and about a woman whose quiet confidence hid years of the most elite training the Navy could offer. Some lessons hurt. Some revelations change everything. And sometimes the person standing quietly at the back of the group is exactly the one you should never underestimate. Get ready to witness what happens when prejudice meets performance, when assumptions crash into reality, and when a squad of Marines learns why you should never judge a book by its cover, especially when Teach the Morning Sun cast long shadows across Camp Pendleton's obstacle course as Lieutenant Sarah Chun adjusted her standard-issue PT gear one final time. The familiar weight of her dog tags felt different today, lighter somehow, as if the metal understood that her carefully guarded secret was about to be tested in ways she had never anticipated. Sarah had arrived at the Marine Corps base 3 weeks earlier as part of a joint military assessment program. To everyone around her, she was simply another Navy officer participating in cross-service training. Her paperwork listed her as a supply chain logistics coordinator, a deliberately boring title that discouraged further questions. What the paperwork didn't mention was that Sarah had spent the last 8 years as a Navy SEAL with 4 combat deployments and more classified missions than she could count on both hands. The decision to keep her real background hidden hadn't been difficult. Sarah had learned long ago that announcing her SEAL status often created more problems than it solved. Some people became intimidated and awkward around her. Others felt the need to constantly test her or prove their own worth. And then there were those who simply didn't believe that a 5'6" woman could possibly be part of the most elite fighting force in the world. So she had chosen silence, allowing people to make their own assumptions while she quietly observed and learned. It was a strategy that had served her well in countless situations, from infiltrating enemy compounds to gathering intelligence at diplomatic functions. Today, however, that strategy was about to face its biggest test yet. The obstacle course at Camp Pendleton was legendary among Marines. Known as the Confidence Course, it stretched across 200 yards of challenging terrain designed to test every aspect of a warrior's physical and mental capabilities. Rope climbs, wall traversals, tire runs, monkey bars, and a dozen other obstacles stood between the starting line and glory. For Marines, conquering this course wasn't just about fitness. It was about proving that you belonged in the Brotherhood. As Sarah approached the staging area, she could hear the distinctive sound of Marine bravado echoing across the field. Sergeant Mike Rodriguez was holding court with his squad, regaling them with stories of his own course record while simultaneously sizing up the day's competition. At 32, Rodriguez was a decorated Marine with 2 tours in Afghanistan and a reputation for being one of the toughest non-commissioned officers in his battalion. His squad looked up to him not just for his military accomplishments, but for his ability to push them beyond what they thought possible. "Look what we got here," Rodriguez announced as he spotted Sarah approaching. His voice carried that particular blend of amusement and skepticism that Sarah had heard countless times before. Navy sending their desk jockeys to play with the real warriors. The comment drew chuckles from his squad. 8 Marines ranging in age from 19 to 28, all of whom had been conditioned to believe that Marines were inherently superior to their counterparts in other branches. Corporal Danny Torres, a stocky 23-year-old from Texas, was the first to join in. "Sarge, you think she's ever even seen a real obstacle course?" Torres asked, loud enough for Sarah to hear. "I mean, how hard can shuffling paperwork be?" Private First Class Jason Wu, barely 20 and still eager to prove himself worthy of his fellow Marines' respect, added his own observation. "She's probably here because some admiral thought it would look good for diversity photos. You know how the Navy loves their publicity stunts." Sarah continued her warm-up routine, methodically stretching her hamstrings and checking her gear. She had learned long ago that the best response to such comments was no response at all. Words were cheap, performance spoke volumes. She could see the course marshal, Staff Sergeant Patricia Williams, preparing the official timing equipment and reviewing safety protocols with the other instructors. Williams was one of the few people at Camp Pendleton who knew Sarah's real background, though she had been instructed to keep that information strictly confidential. As their eyes met across the staging area, Williams gave an almost imperceptible nod, a subtle acknowledgement that she understood the game Sarah was playing and would do nothing to interfere with it. "Hey, Navy," Rodriguez called out directly to Sarah now, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "You sure you're in the right place? The administrative offices are back that way." Sarah looked up from her stretching routine, meeting Rodriguez's gaze with calm, steady eyes. "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, Sergeant," she replied simply. Her voice was quiet, but carried a confidence that seemed to momentarily surprise the Marine squad. "Well, all right then," Rodriguez said, his grin widening. "Just don't want you to get hurt when you realize this isn't like the obstacle courses they probably have at your desk job. This here's the real deal." Corporal Lisa Martinez, the only other woman in Rodriguez's squad, felt a mixture of emotions as she watched the exchange. Part of her wanted to defend Sarah from her squad mates' obvious condescension, but another part wondered if the Navy officer really understood what she was getting herself into. Martinez had fought hard to earn her place among these Marines, and she knew firsthand how physically and mentally demanding their training could be. "Sarge," Martinez said carefully, "maybe we should focus on our own runs instead of worrying about what the Navy can or can't do." Rodriguez waved off her suggestion. "Martinez, sometimes it's good to have a little perspective. Helps us appreciate just how elite our training really is." He turned back to Sarah, who had moved on to checking the tightness of her bootlaces. "Tell you what, Navy, how about we make this interesting? My squad's going to run the course as a team. You want to run with us? Or do you need some kind of special accommodation?" The challenge in his voice was unmistakable. Sarah straightened up slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. She had been in this exact situation more times than she could count, being underestimated, challenged, and expected to either back down or fail spectacularly. What Rodriguez didn't know was that Sarah had conquered obstacle courses that made this one look like a playground. "I'll run it solo," Sarah replied calmly. "Wouldn't want to slow down your team time." The comment drew more laughter from the Marines, though Sarah noticed that Staff Sergeant Williams was watching the interaction with what appeared to be barely contained amusement. Williams knew exactly what these Marines were about to witness, and while she couldn't interfere with the natural course of events, she was clearly looking forward to seeing their reactions. Private Wu leaned over to whisper something to Torres, who immediately burst into laughter. "She thinks she's going to beat our time running solo," Torres announced to the group. "This is going to be better than cable TV." Rodriguez checked his watch and then looked toward the starting line where other military personnel were beginning to gather for their turns at the course. "All right, Marines, let's show our Navy friend how it's done. Remember, we've been training on this course for months. Every obstacle, every transition, every technique has been drilled into you. Execute with precision, support each other, and let's set a time that'll be tough to beat." As the squad moved toward the starting line, Rodriguez couldn't resist one more comment directed at Sarah. "Navy, you might want to pay attention to how this is done. Could save you some embarrassment once your turn." Sarah simply nodded, continuing her preparations with the same methodical approach she had learned during her SEAL training. She checked her gear one final time, ran through the course layout in her mind, and began the mental preparation routine that had served her well in far more dangerous situations than a training exercise. What none of the Marines realized was that Sarah had already identified the optimal path through every obstacle. Her trained eye had cataloged the best grip points on the rope climb, calculated the most efficient rhythm for the tire run, and mapped out the precise hand placements that would get her over the wall traverse in minimal time. This kind of tactical analysis was second nature to her, the same skills she used to plan mission routes through hostile territory. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, being mocked by Marines who probably couldn't qualify for the training she had completed years ago, let alone survive the missions she had executed. But Sarah felt no anger or frustration. Instead, she felt something closer to anticipation. It had been a while since she'd had the opportunity to demonstrate her capabilities in such a clear, public way. As Rodriguez's squad lined up at the starting position, the morning air filled with the sound of Marines psyching themselves up for the challenge ahead. They chanted motivational phrases, slapped each other's backs, and went through their own pre-performance rituals. Their confidence was genuine, They had trained hard for this moment and genuinely believed they were among the most elite warriors in the world. Staff Sergeant Williams approached the starting line with her stopwatch and clipboard, ready to officiate what she expected would be a very educational experience for everyone involved. She caught Sarah's one more time and received a subtle thumbs up in response, a signal that Sarah was ready for whatever was about to happen. "Marines," Williams announced in her authoritative voice, "you know the drill. Complete all obstacles in sequence. Any missed obstacle means disqualification. Safety is paramount, but I expect maximum effort from each of you. Rodriguez, your squad ready?" "Born ready, Staff Sergeant," Rodriguez replied with the enthusiasm that had made him a natural leader among his peers. "Navy personnel," Williams continued, looking directly at Sarah, "same rules apply to you. Complete the course safely and according to protocol. Any questions before we begin?" Sarah shook her head, her expression calm and focused. She had run variations of this exact course hundreds of times during her SEAL training, often while carrying additional equipment and under much more stressful conditions. The familiar pre-mission calm was settling over her now, that state of relaxed alertness that allowed her to perform at her peak while remaining ready to adapt to unexpected challenges. Rodriguez's squad took their positions at the starting line. Each Marine focused on the first obstacle, a series of low crawls under barbed wire followed by a sprint to the rope climb. They had practiced this transition countless times and moved with the precision of a well-oiled machine. "Time starts on my whistle," Williams announced, raising her arm. 3, 2, 1. The sharp blast of the whistle echoed across the training field, and Rodriguez's squad exploded into action. Their months of training showed immediately as they dropped into perfect low-crawl position and began moving under the wire with practiced efficiency. Rodriguez led from the front, calling out encouragement and maintaining the pace that would give them their best possible time. Sarah watched their performance with professional interest, noting their techniques and timing while continuing her own final preparations. She could see that they were well-trained and motivated, moving through the initial obstacles with the kind of teamwork that only came from extensive practice together. Under different circumstances, she might have been impressed by their coordination and dedication. As the Marine squad transitioned from the low crawl to the rope climb, their efficiency became even more apparent. Each Marine attacked the rope with aggressive determination, using techniques that had been drilled into them through countless repetitions. Their form was good, their speed respectable, and their teamwork evident as they encouraged each other through the challenging sections. Torres was the first to reach the top of the rope, followed closely by Martinez and Wu. Rodriguez brought up the rear, but his leadership presence was felt throughout as he continued to call out tactical advice and motivation. They moved as a unit through the monkey bars, supporting each other when fatigue began to set in, and maintaining their aggressive pace through the tire run. By the time they reached the wall traverse, one of the most technically challenging obstacles on the course, Rodriguez's squad had built up a solid rhythm. The wall required precise hand and foot placement combined with upper body strength and core stability. It was the kind of obstacle that separated the truly fit from those who simply looked the part. One by one, the Marines navigated the wall with varying degrees of success. Rodriguez and Martinez made it look almost easy, their technique polished through months of practice. Torres struggled slightly in the middle section, but powered through with determination. Wu had a moment of difficulty near the end, but managed to complete the obstacle without assistance. The final section of the course included a series of hurdles, another rope obstacle, and a sprint to the finish line. Rodriguez's squad maintained their teamwork approach, with stronger members providing encouragement and tactical advice to those who were beginning to show signs of fatigue. Their finish was strong, professional, and worthy of the training they had received. As they crossed the finish line, Rodriguez's Marines were breathing hard but clearly proud of their performance. They had executed well, supported each other effectively, and posted a time that would be difficult for most people to match. Staff Sergeant Williams recorded their official time and nodded approvingly. It was indeed a solid performance worthy of their training and preparation. "Outstanding work, Marines," Williams announced. "That's the kind of teamwork and execution I expect from this unit. Take a few minutes to recover, and then we'll see how our Navy participant performs." Rodriguez and his squad gathered in the shade near the finish line, still catching their breath but clearly satisfied with their effort. They had proven once again that Marines were capable of exceptional performance under pressure, and they were eager to see how their individual Navy competitor would fare against their team time. "No way she beats that," Torres said between heavy breaths. "Did you see how he moved through those obstacles? That was textbook execution." Wu nodded agreement while stretching his cramped forearms. "She's probably back there trying to figure out how to get over the first wall without breaking something." Martinez was less confident in her assessment, though she kept her thoughts to herself. Something about the Navy officer's demeanor had struck her as unusual. The woman hadn't seemed intimidated or nervous like most people facing the confidence course for the first time. Instead, she had displayed the kind of calm focus that Martinez associated with experienced warriors. Rodriguez checked his watch and looked back toward the starting line where Sarah was making her final preparations. "All right, Marines, let's give our Navy friend some encouragement. Nothing wrong with a little friendly motivation." What Rodriguez didn't realize was that Sarah had been listening to their entire conversation while she completed her warm-up routine. Their confidence wasn't misplaced. They had indeed performed well, but their assumptions about her capabilities were about to be challenged in a way that none of them could have imagined. As Sarah approached the starting line for her solo attempt, she felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that preceded any significant challenge. This wasn't about proving anything to the Marines or defending her service branch's honor. This was about maintaining the careful balance she had struck between her cover story and her actual capabilities. She needed to perform well enough to avoid embarrassment while not performing so well that it raised uncomfortable questions about her background. It was a delicate calculation, the kind of operational consideration that had become second nature during her years of covert work. But as she settled into position at the starting line, Sarah realized that her carefully planned approach might not be possible. The Marines' comments and assumptions had awakened something competitive within her, the same drive that had pushed her through SEAL training and sustained her through the most challenging missions of her career. Staff Sergeant Williams raised her arm with the stopwatch, ready to begin the timing for Sarah's individual run. The morning sun was climbing higher now, and the training field was beginning to warm up as other military personnel gathered to watch what had become an impromptu competition between Marine teamwork and Navy individual performance. "Ready, Navy?" Williams asked, her professional demeanor masking her personal anticipation of what was about to unfold. Sarah nodded once, settling into a starting position that looked deceptively casual to the observing Marines, but would have been immediately recognizable to anyone familiar with advanced tactical training. Her breathing was controlled, her focus absolute, and her body coiled with the kind of potential energy that came from years of conditioning at the highest levels. Rodriguez called out from the sideline, "Remember, Navy, this isn't a race against the clock. It's about completing all the obstacles safely. No shame in taking your time." The comment drew chuckles from his squad, but Sarah barely heard it. She was already in the mental zone that allowed her to perform at her peak, the same state of focused calm that had carried her through missions where failure meant death rather than just embarrassment. Williams looked around to ensure that all safety personnel were in position and that the course was clear for Sarah's attempt. The other Marines who had gathered to watch were expecting to see either a respectable but ultimately inferior performance or perhaps an embarrassing failure that would confirm their assumptions about Navy training standards. What they were about to witness instead would challenge everything they thought they knew about elite military capabilities and force them to confront the limitations of their own assumptions. Sarah Chun was about to remind everyone present why judging books by their covers was always a dangerous proposition, especially when those books contained classified chapters that could rewrite everything they thought they understood about warfare and the warriors who conducted it. The whistle was raised to Williams' lips, ready to begin what would become one of the most memorable training exercises in Camp Pendleton's recent history. That book happens to be written in classified ink. The whistle's sharp blast cut through the morning air, and Sarah Chun exploded in emotion with a fluidity that immediately caught the attention of everyone watching. Her transition from stillness to full sprint was seamless, showcasing the kind of explosive power that could only come from years of elite conditioning. Within 3 strides, she had reached a pace that made Rodriguez's squad exchange surprised glances. Sarah dropped into the low crawl position with textbook precision, her body moving under the barbed wire in a way that seemed to defy the laws of friction. Where the Marines had been careful and methodical, Sarah was both faster and more efficient, her movements flowing like water as she navigated the obstacle that had taken Rodriguez's team nearly 2 minutes to complete. "Holy shit," Torres whispered under his breath, his earlier confidence beginning to waver as he watched Sarah emerge from the low-crawl section in less than 60 seconds. "She's moving like..." "Like what?" Wu asked, though his own voice lacked the cocky assurance it had held just minutes earlier. Torres couldn't finish a sentence because he wasn't sure how to describe what he was witnessing. Sarah's movement pattern was unlike anything he had seen from other Navy personnel, and it was beginning to remind him of something he couldn't quite place. Sarah approached the rope climb with the same controlled aggression she had displayed throughout the opening section. This obstacle had been one of the most challenging for Rodriguez's Marines, requiring significant upper body strength and technique to complete efficiently. Most people approached the rope with visible apprehension, understanding that it would test their physical limits in a very public way. Sarah grabbed the rope and began climbing with a technique that made the obstacle look trivial. Her hand-over-hand movement was perfectly rhythmed, her body position optimal for both power and efficiency. She moved up the 30-foot rope with the same ease that most people might climb a ladder, reaching the top in a time that left the watching Marines speechless. Rodriguez felt the first stirring of unease as he watched Sarah's descent. Her controlled drop demonstrated not just physical capability, but the kind of comfort with height and risk that suggested extensive training in similar environments. Marines prided themselves on their ability to adapt to challenging physical situations, but what he was watching exceeded anything he had expected from a Navy logistics coordinator. "Sarge," Martinez said quietly, her voice carrying a note of confusion that mirrored what Rodriguez was feeling. "That's not normal, is it? I mean, for supply chain people." Rodriguez didn't answer because he was beginning to suspect that there was much more to their Navy competitor than her paperwork had indicated. The way she moved, the efficiency of her technique, the calm confidence she displayed under pressure. These weren't characteristics he associated with administrative personnel. Sarah transitioned from the rope climb to the monkey bars without breaking stride, and it was here that her true capabilities became impossible to ignore. The monkey bars were a notorious bottleneck on the confidence course, requiring not just upper body strength, but also grip endurance and strategic pacing. Even well-trained Marines sometimes struggle with this obstacle, especially after the fatigue accumulated from the earlier challenges. Sarah moved across the bars like they were an extension of her own body. Her rhythm was perfect, her grip secure, and her technique so efficient that she completed the entire obstacle in less time than it had taken any individual member of Rodriguez's squad. She dismounted the final bar and immediately transitioned into the tire run without any visible signs of fatigue. The tire run consisted of a series of truck tires laid out in a pattern that required high knees, quick feet, and careful attention to foot placement. It was an obstacle that tested cardiovascular endurance as much as agility, and it often separated those who were truly fit from those who simply appeared to be in good shape. Sarah attacked the tire run with the same systematic precision she had displayed throughout the course. Her foot placement was perfect, her rhythm never faltered, and she maintained a pace that would have been challenging for most people even without the accumulated fatigue from the previous obstacles. She moved through the tires like a dancer who had rehearsed the routine countless times, each step placed with deliberate accuracy. Wu found himself leaning forward involuntarily, trying to understand what he was witnessing. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered to himself. "Nobody moves like that without." He stopped mid-sentence because he was beginning to realize what type of training might produce the performance they were watching. But the possibility that was forming in his mind seemed too unlikely to voice, especially given what they knew about Sarah's supposed background. As Sarah approached the wall traverse, the technical climbing challenge that had tested even the most capable members of Rodriguez's squad, Staff Sergeant Williams found herself fighting to maintain her professional composure. She knew exactly what these Marines were witnessing, and she understood that Sarah was about to shatter every assumption they had made about Navy training standards and capabilities. The wall traverse required climbers to move laterally across an angled surface using only designated hand and footholds. It demanded upper body strength, core stability, mental focus, and technical climbing skills that took most people months to develop. Even experienced Marines sometimes struggled with this obstacle, and it had been the site of numerous minor injuries over the years. Sarah approached the wall with the same calm assessment she had shown throughout the course. She studied the whole pattern for perhaps 10 seconds, long enough to plan her route, but not long enough to suggest any uncertainty about her ability to complete the obstacle. Then, she began climbing with a fluid grace that made the challenge appear effortless. Her hand placement was perfect, her body positioning optimal, and her movement across the wall so smooth that she might have been walking across level ground. She completed the traverse in a time that would have been impressive for someone who specialized in this type of obstacle, let alone someone who was supposedly experiencing it for the first time. Rodriguez felt his understanding of the situation shifting in a way that made him deeply uncomfortable. Everything he thought he knew about Navy personnel, about administrative positions, and about the woman they had been mocking for the past hour was being systematically challenged by what he was witnessing. "That's not possible," Torres said, his voice barely above a whisper. Nobody moves like that without serious training. I mean, serious fucking training." Martinez nodded slowly, her own assumptions crumbling as she watched Sarah dismount the wall traverse and move toward the final section of the course. "Sarge," she said carefully, "what if she's not really supply chain? What if her paperwork is?" "Don't," Rodriguez cut her off, though his tone suggested that he was thinking along the same lines. "Don't start making assumptions. Maybe Navy training is better than we thought." But even as he said it, Rodriguez knew that his explanation didn't hold water. He had worked with Navy personnel before, including some who were genuinely elite performers. What he was watching exceeded even those standards by a significant margin. Sarah Chan was moving through obstacles that challenged trained Marines as if they were minor inconveniences. The final section of the course included a series of hurdles, a cargo net climb, and a sprint to the finish line. This was where accumulated fatigue typically caught up with even the best performers, and where technique often gave way to pure determination and willpower. Rodriguez's squad had struggled through this section, their earlier precision beginning to falter as their bodies reached their physical limits. Sarah approached the hurdles with the same explosive power she had displayed at the starting line. She cleared each barrier with textbook form, her technique so efficient that she seemed to flow over the obstacles rather than jump them. Her rhythm never wavered, and she maintained a pace that suggested she could have continued for significantly longer distances if required. The cargo net climb was next, a towering obstacle that required climbers to ascend a flexible net surface and then descend the opposite side. It tested grip strength, coordination, and comfort with height, and it was one of the few obstacles where size and reach could provide significant advantages. Sarah scaled the net with the efficiency of someone who had done it thousands of times before. Her climbing technique was flawless, her transition smooth, and her descent controlled and professional. She completed the obstacle in a time that would have been respectable for someone twice her size, and she did it with a casual ease that suggested significant experience with similar challenges. Wu was shaking his head slowly, trying to process what he was witnessing. "This isn't real," he said to no one in particular. "This can't be real. Supply chain coordinators don't move like fucking ninjas." His comment drew nervous laughter from his squad mates, but the humor felt forced. They were all beginning to realize that their assumptions about Sarah had been not just wrong, but spectacularly wrong. Whatever her real background might be, it clearly involved training that exceeded anything they had experienced in their own Marine careers. Sarah entered the final sprint with the same controlled aggression she had maintained throughout the entire course. Her stride was long and efficient, her breathing controlled, and her pace suggested that she had significant reserves of energy remaining. She crossed the finish line with a time that left the entire gathering of Marines in stunned silence. Staff Sergeant Williams looked at her stopwatch and then looked at it again, as if the numbers might somehow change if she stared at them long enough. Sarah's individual time hadn't just beaten the Marine squad's team effort. It had demolished it by a margin that shouldn't have been possible under normal circumstances. "Fine," Williams announced in a voice that carried across the training field. The number she called out sent a ripple of disbelief through the assembled Marines and left Rodriguez's squad staring at each other in confusion. Sarah had completed the entire confidence course solo in a time that was nearly 40% faster than Rodriguez's 8-person team. She had done it while displaying a level of technical proficiency that suggested extensive experience with similar obstacles, and she had finished with energy reserves that indicated she could have repeated the performance if necessary. As Sarah jogged back toward the group, her breathing only slightly elevated and her demeanor as calm as it had been at the beginning of the exercise, Rodriguez found himself facing a reality that challenged everything he thought he understood about military training and capabilities. "That's not possible," he said to himself, though his voice was loud enough for his squad to hear. "That's just not fucking possible." Torres was nodding agreement, his earlier cockiness replaced by a mixture of confusion and grudging respect. "Sarge, I don't know what the hell we just saw, but that wasn't normal. That was something else entirely." Martinez was studying Sarah's approach with the analytical mind that had made her one of the most promising Marines in her unit. She was beginning to piece together clues that pointed toward a conclusion that seemed almost too incredible to believe, but which would explain everything they had just witnessed. "Look at how she moves," Martinez said quietly to her squad mates. "Look at her breathing, her posture, the way she scans the area. That's not administrative training. That's combat training. High-level combat training." Wu was shaking his head in amazement, his earlier dismissive comments now seeming embarrassingly naive. "If she's really supply chain, then I'm a fucking rocket scientist. Nobody develops that kind of capability pushing paperwork around." As Sarah approached their group, Rodriguez felt the uncomfortable realization that he and his Marines had just been schooled by someone they had spent the morning mocking. The professional embarrassment was significant, but more troubling was the growing suspicion that they had completely misunderstood who they were dealing with. Sarah's approach was unhurried and confident, her demeanor showing no trace of the triumph or vindication that might have been expected after such a dominant performance. Instead, she moved with the same quiet professionalism she had displayed throughout the morning, as if demolishing the course record had been a minor inconvenience rather than a significant achievement. "Good run, Marines," Sarah said as she reached Rodriguez's group, her tone carrying genuine respect for their earlier performance. "That was solid teamwork out there. You should be proud of your coordination and mutual support." The comment was gracious and professional, but it also highlighted the magnitude of what had just occurred. Sarah had just outperformed their entire team while running solo, and she was offering them praise for their effort. The role reversal was complete and undeniable. Rodriguez struggled to find an appropriate response. His natural instinct was to demand an explanation, to challenge Sarah's background, or to find some way to diminish what they had all just witnessed. But his professional training recognized exceptional performance when he saw it, and what Sarah had just accomplished clearly fell into that category. "That was—" Rodriguez began, then stopped as he realized he didn't have adequate words to describe what he had witnessed. "That was an impressive run." The admission cost him something, but Rodriguez was enough of a professional to recognize when he had been outclassed. Whatever Sarah's real background might be, her performance had earned a level of respect that no amount of pride or preconception could overcome. Sarah nodded acknowledgement of his comment, but didn't elaborate on her performance or offer any explanation for her capabilities. She maintained the same professional demeanor that had characterized her entire morning, leaving the Marines to draw their own conclusions about what they had witnessed. Staff Sergeant Williams approached the group with her clipboard and stopwatch, her expression carefully neutral despite the extraordinary nature of what had just occurred. She had protocol to follow and reports to file, but she also understood that the morning's events had created a situation that would require careful handling. "Outstanding performance by everyone involved," Williams announced to the assembled group. "Rodriguez, your squad demonstrated excellent teamwork and tactical coordination. That's exactly the kind of unit cohesion we expect from Marines." Rodriguez's squad accepted the praise, but their attention remained focused on Sarah and the questions raised by her performance. They were beginning to understand that they had witnessed something unusual, but the full implications of what they had seen were still beyond their comprehension. Williams turned to Sarah with what appeared to be professional acknowledgement, but which Sarah recognized as barely contained amusement. Excellent individual performance. That's some of the most efficient obstacle navigation I've seen on this course. The comment was professionally appropriate, but deliberately understated. Williams knew exactly what Sarah's background entailed, and she understood that the morning's demonstration had been carefully calculated to achieve specific objectives without revealing too much classified information. Sarah accepted the recognition with a simple nod, maintaining the character she had established while internally assessing how her performance might affect her ongoing cover story. She had achieved her primary objective of avoiding embarrassment, but she had perhaps been more dominant than strictly necessary for maintaining her administrative cover. The challenge now would be handling the inevitable questions and speculation that her performance would generate. Marines were naturally curious about exceptional capability, and they would not be easily satisfied with vague explanations or deflected inquiries. Sarah would need to walk a careful line between maintaining operational security and providing enough information to satisfy their professional interest. As the morning training session concluded and personnel began dispersing to their next assignments, Rodriguez found himself lingering near the obstacle course with his squad. They were all processing what they had witnessed, and none of them were quite ready to return to their normal routines without some attempt to understand what had just occurred. "Sarge," Torres said carefully, "what do you think her real background is? Because that performance, that wasn't normal." Rodriguez looked back toward the course where Sarah was conducting what appeared to be a casual cool-down routine, but which he was beginning to recognize as something more systematic and professional. Her movements suggested training that went far beyond anything he associated with administrative positions. "I think," Rodriguez said slowly, "that we may have made some assumptions this morning that weren't entirely accurate." It was as close as he could come to admitting that they had completely misjudged the situation, and that their Navy competitor possessed capabilities that exceeded anything they had expected to encounter in a routine training exercise. The implications of that realization would continue to develop as the day progressed, and word of Sarah's performance spread throughout the base. Word of Sarah's performance spread through Camp Pendleton with the speed that only military gossip could achieve. By noon, every Marine in Rodriguez's battalion had heard some version of the story, and by evening, the tale had reached units across the entire base. The details varied with each telling, but the core narrative remained consistent. A Navy supply officer had destroyed the confidence course record while making it look effortless. Major Patricia Hayes, the battalion commander, heard the first reports during her afternoon briefing and initially dismissed them as the kind of exaggerated stories that routinely circulated among enlisted personnel. But when Staff Sergeant Williams submitted her official training report with times and performance metrics, Hayes realized that something genuinely unusual had occurred during the morning exercise. Hayes had been a Marine for 18 years, with deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan, and a reputation for being able to assess military capability with scientific precision. She understood exactly what the confidence course demanded from those who attempted it, and she knew that the performance Williams was reporting exceeded the capabilities of all but the most elite military personnel. What troubled Hayes even more than Sarah's individual performance was the report of how Rodriguez's squad had been behaving before and during the exercise. Professional Marines were expected to maintain high standards regardless of the service branch affiliation of their training partners, and what Williams had observed suggested that Rodriguez's leadership had allowed personal prejudices to affect his squad's professionalism. That evening, Hayes called Rodriguez to her office for a conversation that would prove to be one of the most educational experiences of his Marine career. The Major's office was spartanly decorated with the kinds of commendations and photographs that marked a successful military career, but Rodriguez found himself focusing on Hayes' expression rather than her credentials. "Sergeant Rodriguez," Hayes began without preamble, "I've reviewed Staff Sergeant Williams' training report from this morning. I'd like to hear your assessment of what occurred during the obstacle course exercise." Rodriguez had been dreading this conversation all afternoon, knowing that his squad's behavior had been observed and documented by multiple witnesses. He had spent hours trying to develop an explanation that would minimize the professional embarrassment while acknowledging the obvious questions raised by Sarah's performance. "Ma'am, The Navy participant performed at a level that exceeded our expectations, Rodriguez began carefully. Her technique and conditioning were impressive. Hayes leaned back in her chair, studying Rodriguez with the kind of analytical attention that made subordinates understand why she had been promoted to command positions. Sergeant, I'm not asking for a diplomatic assessment. I'm asking for your professional opinion about what you witnessed. The direct question forced Rodriguez to confront the reality that he had been avoiding all day. Ma'am, in my professional opinion, the Navy officer's performance suggested training and experience that significantly exceeded what we would expect from administrative personnel. Her capabilities appeared to be more consistent with specialized combat roles. Hayes nodded slowly, appreciating Rodriguez's honesty even as she recognized the implications of what he was admitting. And what was your squad's behavior toward this Navy officer before and during the exercise? The question struck at the heart of Rodriguez's professional embarrassment. He had allowed his Marines to engage in behavior that reflected poorly on their training and leadership, and there was no way to minimize that failure without compromising his integrity. Ma'am, my squad made assumptions about the Navy officer's capabilities based on her supposed administrative background. Those assumptions led to comments and attitudes that were not consistent with the professional standards we expect from Marines. Hayes appreciated Rodriguez's direct acknowledgement of the problem, but she was more interested in ensuring that he understood the broader implications of what had occurred. Sergeant, what do you think those assumptions cost you and your Marines? Rodriguez had been asking himself the same question all afternoon. Ma'am, our assumptions prevented us from recognizing and respecting exceptional capability. We missed an opportunity to learn from someone who clearly possessed skills and experience that could have benefited our own training. The answer demonstrated that Rodriguez understood at least part of the lesson that Hayes wanted him to learn, but she suspected there were deeper implications that he hadn't yet grasped. Sergeant, I want you to consider another possibility, Hayes said carefully. What if this Navy officer's administrative position is not her primary role? What if there are aspects of her background that aren't reflected in her standard paperwork? The suggestion forced Rodriguez to confront a possibility that had been lurking at the edge of his awareness since witnessing Sarah's performance. If Sarah's real background was classified or compartmentalized, then his squad's behavior had been not just unprofessional, but potentially insulting to someone whose actual service record might exceed their own. Ma'am, Rodriguez said slowly, if that's the case, then we may have seriously misjudged not just her capabilities, but her position and experience within the Navy. Hayes nodded approvingly. Rodriguez was beginning to understand the full scope of his squad's error, and more importantly, he was recognizing the kinds of assumptions that could lead to similar mistakes in the future. Meanwhile, Sarah was dealing with her own set of challenges as news of her performance continued to spread throughout the base. She had spent the afternoon fielding increasingly direct questions about her background, training, and experience, all while maintaining her administrative cover story and avoiding any disclosures that might compromise operational security. The attention was exactly what Sarah had hoped to avoid when she chose to keep her SEAL background hidden. Marines were naturally curious about exceptional performance, and they possessed the analytical skills necessary to piece together clues that might reveal more than she wanted them to know about her real capabilities and experience. Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Thompson, the base's training coordinator, had requested a meeting with Sarah to discuss her interest in participating in additional cross-service exercises. Thompson was a career Marine with extensive experience in special operations, and Sarah suspected that he might possess the background necessary to recognize the implications of her morning performance. Thompson's office reflected his operational background, with maps, training manuals, and photographs that documented his involvement in some of the Marine Corps' most challenging missions. But Sarah noticed immediately that Thompson was studying her with the kind of professional interest that suggested he suspected there was more to her background than her paperwork indicated. Lieutenant Chun, Thompson began, I've reviewed the reports from this morning's obstacle course exercise. That was an impressive performance, especially for someone whose primary role is in logistics coordination. The comment was professionally phrased, but Sarah recognized it as the opening move in what was likely to be a careful interrogation. Thompson was testing to see how she would respond to indirect challenges about her background and experience. Thank you, sir, Sarah replied simply. I've always tried to maintain good physical conditioning regardless of my assigned duties. It was a truthful answer that acknowledged his compliment while providing no additional information about her training or background. Sarah had learned long ago that the best cover stories were built on foundations of truth, even when those truths were carefully limited in scope. Thompson nodded thoughtfully, recognizing Sarah's deflection while respecting her obvious intention to maintain privacy about her background. Have you had previous experience with obstacle course training? The question was more direct, forcing Sarah to provide information that might reveal aspects of her background while avoiding outright lies that could be easily verified or contradicted. I participated in various types of physical training throughout my Navy career, sir. Some of that has included obstacle courses and similar challenges. Again, the answer was technically truthful while revealing nothing about the extent or nature of her actual training. Sarah was walking the careful line between maintaining her cover and avoiding statements that could be proven false if Thompson chose to investigate her background more thoroughly. Thompson smiled slightly, recognizing the professional skill with which Sarah was handling his questions. Her responses demonstrated exactly the kind of operational awareness he would expect from someone with advanced military training, even as she carefully avoided providing any specific information about that training. Lieutenant, would you be interested in participating in some of our more advanced training exercises? We occasionally run joint operation scenarios that might benefit from Navy participation. The offer was genuinely meant to be helpful, but it also represented a potential complication for Sarah's ongoing mission. Participating in advanced exercises might provide valuable cross-training opportunities, but it would also increase her exposure to Marines with specialized backgrounds who might be better positioned to recognize her real capabilities. I appreciate the offer, sir, Sarah replied carefully. I need to check with my chain of command about availability and mission requirements, but I'm generally interested in opportunities for professional development. Thompson nodded understanding, recognizing that Sarah needed to maintain her administrative responsibilities while considering additional training opportunities. But he was also beginning to suspect that her chain of command might involve personnel whose identities and positions were not reflected in standard organizational charts. As word of Sarah's performance continued to circulate throughout Camp Pendleton, it reached the attention of personnel whose own backgrounds included experience with elite military units. Chief Warrant Officer David Park had spent 12 years as a Marine Force reconnaissance operator before transitioning to training and assessment roles, and he possessed the kind of specialized knowledge that allowed him to recognize exceptional capability when he encountered it. Park had heard multiple versions of the morning's events, but what interested him most was the consistency of the descriptions regarding Sarah's movement patterns and technical proficiency. The details being reported suggested training methodologies and skill development that he associated with very specific types of military programs. That evening, Park approached Staff Sergeant Williams to discuss her observations of Sarah's performance. Williams was one of the few people on base who knew Sarah's real background, but she was also bound by operational security requirements that prevented her from discussing classified information with unauthorized personnel. Staff Sergeant, Park began carefully, I've been hearing some interesting reports about this morning's obstacle course exercise. Some of the details sound familiar to me, but I'm having trouble placing them in the context of standard Navy training. Williams recognized immediately that Park was fishing for information about Sarah's background, and she suspected that his own operational experience might have given him insights that could compromise Sarah's cover story if not handled carefully. Chief, the Navy participant demonstrated exceptional physical conditioning and technical proficiency, Williams replied professionally. Her performance was certainly above average for personnel in administrative roles. Park nodded slowly, understanding that Williams was being deliberately circumspect in her assessment. Her careful phrasing suggested that there were aspects of the situation that couldn't be discussed openly, which only increased his suspicions about Sarah's real background. Staff Sergeant, in your professional opinion, would that level of performance be consistent with specialized military training? The kind of training that might not be reflected in standard personnel records. The question was as direct as Park could make it without explicitly asking Williams to compromise operational security. He was trying to determine whether Sarah's background included the kind of classified training that would explain her exceptional performance while remaining hidden from casual observation. Williams found herself in a difficult position, caught between Park's legitimate professional curiosity and her obligation to protect Sarah's operational cover. She needed to provide enough information to satisfy Park's inquiry without revealing details that could compromise ongoing missions or expose classified capabilities. Chief, I think it would be inappropriate for me to speculate about the specific nature of anyone's background or training, Williams replied carefully. What I can tell you is that the performance I observed this morning was consistent with someone who has extensive experience with similar challenges. Park understood Williams' position and respected her adherence to security protocols, but her careful non-answer had actually provided him with significant information. The fact that Williams couldn't discuss Sarah's background openly was almost as revealing as any direct statement about her real role or experience. As the day progressed, and discussions about Sarah's performance continued throughout the base, a consensus was beginning to emerge among the more experienced Marines. Whatever Sarah's administrative cover story might suggest, her actual capabilities and training background clearly extended far beyond logistics coordination. Rodriguez's squad was experiencing their own process of realization and adjustment as they processed the morning's events and their implications. They had begun the day confident in their own abilities and dismissive of their Navy competitor, but they were ending it with a much more complex understanding of military capability and the dangers of making assumptions based on limited information. Torres had spent the afternoon researching Navy Special Operations programs, trying to understand what kind of training might produce the performance they had witnessed. His investigation had led him to information about programs and capabilities that he hadn't previously known existed within the Navy, and he was beginning to understand that his knowledge of other service branches had been more limited than he had realized. "Sarge," Torres said during their evening debrief, "I've been thinking about this morning, and I think we may have really screwed up, not just in terms of being wrong about her capabilities, but in terms of how we treated someone who might be, well, someone whose real job is probably a lot more serious than ours." Rodriguez nodded grimly, having reached similar conclusions during his own afternoon reflection. "Torres, I think you're right. And I think the lesson here isn't just about not making assumptions. It's about recognizing that there are people in the military whose real roles and capabilities aren't always visible in their public assignments." Martinez had been having her own realizations about the implications of Sarah's performance and their squad's behavior. "What if she's not just elite Navy?" she asked quietly. "What if she's something like, I don't know, like special operations? What if we spent the morning making jokes about someone whose actual job involves the kind of missions we only hear about in briefings?" The suggestion sent a chill through the squad as they considered the possibility that their morning's entertainment might have come at the expense of someone whose service record included classified operations and capabilities that exceeded their own by significant margins. Wu was shaking his head slowly, processing the full scope of their potential error. If that's true, then we didn't just embarrass ourselves. We disrespected someone whose actual contributions to national security probably make our deployments look like training exercises. As evening settled over Camp Pendleton and the base prepared for another day of training and operations, Sarah Chun was completing her own assessment of the day's events and their impact on her ongoing mission. She had successfully avoided the embarrassment that might have compromised her cover story, but she had perhaps revealed more about her capabilities than was strictly necessary for maintaining her administrative persona. The challenge moving forward would be managing the increased attention and curiosity that her performance had generated while continuing to fulfill her actual mission requirements. Sarah understood that some level of speculation about her background was inevitable, but she needed to ensure that such speculation didn't evolve into investigation that might compromise operational security. As she prepared for sleep, Sarah reflected on the morning's events and the lessons they contained for everyone involved. Rodriguez's squad had learned about the dangers of making assumptions and the importance of maintaining professional respect regardless of apparent circumstances. The base personnel who had witnessed or heard about her performance had been reminded that military capability often exceeded what was visible in standard organizational charts and personnel records. For Sarah herself, the day had provided a reminder of the delicate balance required to maintain effective cover stories while operating in environments where exceptional performance might be necessary for mission success. It had also demonstrated the professional quality of the Marines she was working alongside, even when their initial assumptions had been incorrect. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities for cross-service learning and cooperation. But today had established that there was more depth and complexity to the relationship between different military branches than anyone had initially recognized, and that assumption-making was a luxury that professional warriors could not afford. 3 days after the obstacle course incident, Sarah found herself facing a situation that would test her cover story in ways she hadn't anticipated. Major Hayes had organized a joint training exercise designed to foster better cooperation between Marine and Navy personnel stationed at Camp Pendleton, and Sarah's performance had earned her a prominent role in the planning and execution phases. The exercise was designed to simulate a complex urban warfare scenario where Marines and Navy personnel would need to work together to secure a hostile environment and extract high-value targets. It was exactly the kind of training that would showcase Sarah's real capabilities while potentially exposing the gap between her cover story and actual experience. Sarah sat in the briefing room surrounded by Marines and Navy personnel, listening as Major Hayes outlined the exercise parameters. The scenario involved multiple phases of operation, each designed to test different aspects of military capability from reconnaissance and infiltration to direct action and extraction. The objective, Hayes explained, pointing to a detailed map of the training area, is to penetrate a defended compound, locate and secure 3 high-value targets, and extract them to safety while minimizing casualties and maintaining operational security. Rodriguez, who was serving as one of the Marine team leaders, found himself studying Sarah's reaction to the briefing with intense professional interest. Her demeanor during the planning session was markedly different from her previous administrative persona, more focused, more analytical, and demonstrating a level of tactical understanding that seemed inconsistent with logistics coordination. As Hayes continued her briefing, Sarah asked questions that revealed intimate knowledge of urban combat tactics, extraction procedures, and operational planning methodologies. Her inquiries were precise, professional, and demonstrated the kind of specialized knowledge that only came from extensive experience with similar missions. Lieutenant Shun, Hayes said at one point, "You seem to have considerable insight into these types of operations. Have you participated in similar exercises before?" The question was carefully phrased, but Sarah recognized it as another probe into her background and experience. She needed to provide an answer that acknowledged her obvious knowledge while maintaining her administrative cover. "Ma'am, I've studied various operational scenarios as part of my logistics training," Sarah replied. Understanding tactical requirements is essential for effective supply chain coordination in complex environments. It was a plausible explanation that allowed for her demonstrated knowledge while reinforcing her cover story. But Sarah noticed that several of the Marines in the room were exchanging skeptical glances. Her tactical insights were exceeding what anyone would expect from supply chain personnel, regardless of their theoretical training. Chief Warrant Officer Park, who had been assigned to observe the exercise and assess its training value, was taking careful notes about each participant's contributions to the planning process. Sarah's input was consistently sophisticated and operationally sound, reflecting a level of understanding that he associated with personnel who had extensive field experience. The exercise was scheduled to begin the following morning, with teams being assigned based on complementary capabilities and the need to foster inter-service cooperation. Sarah found herself assigned to Rodriguez's squad, a pairing that Hayes had specifically arranged to help both the Marines and the Navy officer learn from each other's approaches and expertise. That evening, Rodriguez's squad gathered for their own planning session to discuss tactics and coordinate their approach to the following day's challenges. Sarah's presence changed the dynamics significantly, as her questions and suggestions consistently demonstrated knowledge that exceeded her supposed background. "So, Torres began, his tone more respectful than it had been during their first encounter. "What's your read on the compound layout? Any thoughts on approach routes?" Sarah studied the tactical map for a few moments, her analysis clearly drawing on extensive experience with similar situations. "The eastern approach offers better concealment, but it also channels us into a potential kill zone if they have overwatch positions here and here," she said, pointing to specific locations on the map. Her assessment was tactically sound and demonstrated understanding of urban combat principles that went far beyond what anyone would expect from administrative personnel. Martinez noticed that Sarah's analysis included considerations for fields of fire, escape routes, and defensive positions that reflected genuine operational experience. What about extraction? Wu asked, genuinely curious about Sarah's perspective. How do we get 3 targets out of there without exposing ourselves to counterattack? Sarah's response was immediate and comprehensive, outlining an extraction plan that included contingency routes, communication protocols, and security measures that reflected sophisticated understanding of special operations procedures. Her plan was not only tactically sound, but demonstrated familiarity with methodologies that were typically classified within special operations communities. Rodriguez found himself in the uncomfortable position of recognizing that Sarah's tactical knowledge exceeded his own in several key areas. Her suggestions consistently improved their operational plan while demonstrating expertise that seemed completely inconsistent with her administrative background. "Chun," Rodriguez said carefully, "where exactly did you learn about extraction procedures? Because that level of detail isn't usually covered in logistics training." Sarah realized that her contributions to the planning session had perhaps revealed more about her background than was wise, but she was committed to ensuring that the exercise succeeded and that her temporary teammates had the best possible chance of completing their mission safely. "Sergeant, I've had the opportunity to work with various operational units during my Navy career," she replied diplomatically. "You pick up a lot of practical knowledge when you're supporting people who do this kind of work professionally." It was a reasonable explanation that acknowledged her expertise while maintaining plausible deniability about the specific nature of her experience. But Rodriguez was beginning to suspect that Sarah's support role might have involved much more direct participation than her explanation suggested. The following morning brought perfect conditions for the training exercise: clear skies, moderate temperatures, and excellent visibility across the training area. The compound had been constructed to simulate a typical urban environment with multiple buildings, defensive positions, and the kind of complex layout that made tactical operations challenging. As the teams moved into their starting positions, Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that preceded any significant mission. The exercise might be training, but it was designed to replicate the stress, complexity, and decision-making challenges of real-world operations. For someone with Sarah's background, the distinction between training and actual missions was often minimal. Rodriguez's squad took their assigned position at the eastern approach that Sarah had recommended, and Rodriguez found himself deferring to her tactical judgment in ways that surprised his Marines. Sarah's suggestions had consistently proven sound during their planning session, and her calm confidence suggested experience that justified following her lead. "Chun," Rodriguez whispered as they prepared to begin their approach, "you take point on the reconnaissance. Your route selection yesterday was solid, and you seem to have good instinct for this kind of work." Sarah nodded and moved into the lead position with the fluid efficiency that had characterized her obstacle course performance. Her movement through the urban environment was textbook perfect, controlled, deliberate, and demonstrating awareness of tactical considerations that kept the team hidden while advancing toward their objective. As they moved through the compound's outer perimeter, Sarah's navigation choices consistently avoided the observation points and potential ambush locations that had been established by the opposing force. Her route was not only tactically sound, but demonstrated familiarity with urban warfare principles that exceeded anything Rodriguez had expected. The first phase of the exercise required the team to penetrate the compound's defenses and establish an observation post that would allow them to identify the locations of the 3 high-value targets. This phase tested reconnaissance skills, stealth capabilities, and the ability to gather intelligence without compromising the mission. Sarah moved through this phase with an expertise that made Rodriguez increasingly certain that her real background involved extensive operational experience. Her reconnaissance techniques were flawless, her communication discipline perfect, and her tactical decision-making consistently sound. When they encountered their first opposing force checkpoint, Sarah's response was immediate and professional. She identified the optimal bypass route, coordinated the team's movement with silent hand signals, and ensured that they maintained tactical integrity while avoiding detection. "How did you know about that checkpoint?" Martinez whispered as they regrouped in a concealed position beyond the obstacle. Movement patterns, Sarah replied simply. The way they positioned themselves created dead space that we could exploit. Her explanation was accurate, but revealed analytical capabilities that impressed the Marines while raising additional questions about her training and experience. Sarah was consistently demonstrating skills that seemed inconsistent with her administrative cover story. The second phase of the exercise required direct action to secure the high-value targets while neutralizing the opposing force elements protecting them. This phase would test combat skills, teamwork, and the ability to execute complex tactical maneuvers under pressure. As Rodriguez's squad prepared for the assault phase, Sarah's contributions became even more obviously professional. Her understanding of entry techniques, room clearing procedures, and tactical coordination exceeded that of several of the Marines in the squad. "Chun," Rodriguez said quietly, "I want you on the entry team. Your tactical sense has been spot on all morning." Sarah nodded acceptance of the assignment, while internally calculating how her performance during the assault phase might affect her ongoing cover story. Direct combat action would showcase capabilities that would be difficult to explain through administrative training, but the exercise's success depended on each team member contributing their maximum capability. The assault phase began with textbook precision as Rodriguez's squad approached their assigned building using the tactical approach that Sarah had recommended. Her movement during the approach was flawless, professional, controlled, and demonstrating the kind of combat awareness that only came from extensive experience in similar situations. When they reached the building's entry point, Sarah automatically took the lead position in the stack formation that would allow them to clear the structure systematically. Her positioning and hand signals were those of someone thoroughly familiar with close-quarters combat procedures. "Ready," Rodriguez whispered, his question directed to Sarah as the team leader for the entry. "Execute," Sarah replied, and the squad flowed into the building with precision that surprised even the exercise observers. Sarah's room-clearing technique was flawless. She moved through the structure with tactical efficiency that demonstrated extensive training in close-quarters combat, consistently making decisions that kept the team safe while advancing toward their objectives. Her performance was not just competent, it was exceptional. During the clearing process, the squad encountered several opposing force members who had been positioned to test the assault team's combat skills. Sarah's engagement of these targets was immediate, precise, and demonstrated marksmanship capabilities that left Rodriguez's Marines exchanging impressed glances. "Target neutralized," Sarah announced after engaging an opposing force member who had been positioned in a tactically challenging location. Her shot placement had been perfect, and her tactical movement during the engagement had been textbook special operations procedure. Torres, who was providing overwatch during Sarah's engagement, found himself staring at her in amazement. "Chun, where the hell did you learn to shoot like that?" "Practice," Sarah replied simply, though her tone suggested that practice had involved much more than recreational marksmanship training. As the squad continued through the building, Sarah's performance continued to exceed everyone's expectations. She consistently made tactical decisions that demonstrated advanced training, engaged targets with precision that suggested extensive combat experience, and coordinated team movement with the efficiency of someone thoroughly familiar with special operations procedures. The exercise's final phase required extraction of the 3 high-value targets while avoiding pursuit and maintaining operational security. This phase tested endurance, tactical planning, and the ability to adapt to changing circumstances while under pressure. Sarah's extraction plan proved to be as sophisticated as her assault tactics had been. She coordinated the team's movement through hostile territory with precision that minimized exposure while maintaining rapid progress toward the extraction point. Her navigation choices consistently avoided the predetermined obstacles that had been designed to challenge the participating teams. During the extraction phase, Rodriguez found himself following Sarah's lead without question. Her tactical judgment had proven sound throughout the exercise, and her performance had demonstrated capabilities that clearly exceeded his own in several key areas. "Chun," Rodriguez said as they approached the final checkpoint before the extraction point. "That was outstanding work back there. Where exactly did you say you learned these skills?" Sarah maintained her focus on the tactical situation while considering how to respond to Rodriguez's increasingly direct questions about her background. Her performance during the exercise had clearly exceeded what could be explained through administrative training, but operational security requirements prevented her from providing detailed explanations about her real experience. "Sergeant," Sarah replied carefully, "the Navy provides extensive training opportunities for personnel in various specialties. I've been fortunate to work with some exceptional instructors over the years." It was a diplomatic answer that acknowledged Rodriguez's question while revealing nothing specific about the nature of her training or experience. But Rodriguez was beginning to understand that Sarah's training opportunities had clearly included programs that weren't reflected in standard Navy personnel development courses. As Rodriguez's squad successfully completed the extraction phase and reached the designated safe zone, the exercise observers were taking careful notes about each participant's performance. Sarah's contributions had been consistently exceptional, demonstrating capabilities that exceeded those of several experienced Marines while maintaining the kind of tactical discipline that characterized elite military units. Major Hayes, who had been monitoring the exercise from the command post, was particularly impressed by the seamless integration of Navy and Marine capabilities that Rodriguez's squad had demonstrated. Sarah's performance had clearly elevated the entire team's effectiveness while showcasing the kind of inter-service cooperation that the exercise had been designed to foster. But Hayes was also recognizing that Sarah's performance raised questions about her background that would need to be addressed carefully. The capabilities she had demonstrated during the exercise exceeded what anyone would expect from administrative personnel, and Hayes suspected that there were aspects of Sarah's service record that weren't reflected in her standard paperwork. As the exercise concluded and participants gathered for the after-action review, Sarah found herself the center of attention in ways that made her increasingly uncomfortable. Her performance had been observed by multiple Marines with specialized backgrounds, and their questions were becoming increasingly direct and sophisticated. The after-action review took place in the same briefing room where the exercise had been planned, but the atmosphere was markedly different now. The Marines who had witnessed Sarah's performance were looking at her with a mixture of professional respect and intense curiosity that made maintaining her cover story increasingly challenging. Major Hayes stood at the front of the room with a detailed analysis of the exercise results, but Sarah noticed that much of the attention was focused on her rather than on the official briefing. The questions that would inevitably follow would require careful navigation between operational security and professional courtesy. Outstanding performance by all participating units. Hayes began, her tone reflecting genuine satisfaction with the exercise outcomes. The integration of Navy and Marine capabilities exceeded our expectations and demonstrated the value of joint training operations. Rodriguez's squad had been singled out for particular recognition, with Hayes noting their exceptional tactical coordination and mission execution. But Sarah realized that the praise was creating additional scrutiny of her individual contributions to the team's success. "Lieutenant Chun," Hayes continued, "your tactical contributions were particularly noteworthy. Your reconnaissance planning and assault coordination demonstrated exceptional military judgment. The public recognition was professionally appropriate, but Sarah understood that it would intensify the questions about her background that several Marines were clearly preparing to ask. She needed to find a way to acknowledge the compliment while deflecting attention from the implications of her performance. "Thank you, ma'am," Sarah replied simply. "It was an excellent learning opportunity, and I was fortunate to work with such a professional team." Her response was gracious, but deliberately modest, designed to shift focus back to the team's collective performance rather than her individual capabilities. But Sarah could see that several of the Marines in the room were not satisfied with her deflection. Chief Warrant Officer Park, who had been observing the exercise with particular attention to Sarah's performance, was preparing to ask questions that would be difficult to answer without revealing classified information. His own special operations background had given him the knowledge necessary to recognize the implications of what he had witnessed. "Lieutenant," Park began carefully, "your tactical proficiency was remarkable for someone in logistics coordination. Have you had previous experience with special operations training?" The question was as direct as Park could make it without explicitly challenging Sarah's cover story, but it forced her to choose between maintaining operational security and providing enough information to satisfy legitimate professional curiosity. "Chief, I've had the opportunity to work with various specialized units during my Navy career," Sarah replied diplomatically. That exposure has provided valuable learning experiences. Park nodded slowly, recognizing Sarah's careful non-answer while understanding that her reluctance to provide specific details might itself be significant. Personnel with genuinely classified backgrounds often responded to direct questions in exactly the manner Sarah was demonstrating. Rodriguez found himself in the uncomfortable position of wanting to challenge Sarah's obvious deflection while recognizing that pushing too hard might compromise professional relationships or reveal information that wasn't appropriate for public discussion. Chun, Rodriguez said carefully, speaking professionally, your performance today suggested training and experience that goes well beyond what most people receive in supporting roles. Are you sure there isn't more to your background that might be relevant for future joint exercises? The question was diplomatically phrased, but clearly challenged Sarah to provide a more complete explanation of her capabilities and experience. Rodriguez was trying to balance professional curiosity with respect for potential security considerations. Sarah realized that the moment she had been anticipating throughout her assignment had finally arrived. The accumulation of questions and observations had reached a point where maintaining her administrative cover story was becoming more problematic than revealing selected aspects of her real background. She looked around the room at the assembled Marines and Navy personnel, recognizing that several of them possessed the experience and knowledge necessary to understand the implications of what she was about to reveal. The decision to disclose her real background would need to be carefully calibrated to provide enough information to satisfy their questions without compromising ongoing operational security. Sergeant Rodriguez, Sarah began slowly, I appreciate your professional interest in my background. You're correct that there are aspects of my Navy service that aren't reflected in my current administrative assignment. The admission sent a ripple of attention through the room as everyone recognized that Sarah was about to provide the explanation they had been seeking. Hayes leaned forward slightly, understanding that whatever Sarah was about to reveal would significantly change the dynamic of her assignment at Camp Pendleton. I'm actually a Navy SEAL, Sarah continued quietly. I've been assigned to this position as part of a joint assessment program, but my primary background involves 8 years of special operations experience with 4 combat deployments. The revelation hit the room like a physical force, instantly reframing everything that had occurred over the past several days. Rodriguez's squad found themselves processing the realization that they had spent days working alongside someone whose operational experience exceeded their own by significant margins. Torres was the first to find his voice, though his tone reflected the mixture of embarrassment and amazement that several Marines were experiencing. Holy shit, Chun. You're a real SEAL. Sarah nodded confirmation while studying the room's reaction to her disclosure. The Marines were processing the information in different ways, but she could see recognition, respect, and, in some cases, embarrassment as they remembered their initial assumptions and comments. 8 years, Martinez asked, her voice reflecting genuine awe. How many missions? How many deployments? I mean, if you could talk about it. Sarah appreciated Martinez's recognition that much of her experience might involve classified information that couldn't be discussed openly. 4 deployments, multiple missions that I can't discuss in detail. But, yes, this is my primary background. Rodriguez was shaking his head slowly as he processed the full implications of what Sarah had revealed. Chun, Jesus Christ. We spent 3 days questioning your background when you could probably teach courses on half the stuff we've been doing. The comment reflected Rodriguez's growing understanding of just how significantly he and his squad had misjudged the situation. They had been treating someone with elite special operations experience as if she were a novice, and they had missed countless opportunities to learn from her expertise. Park was nodding slowly, his suspicions confirmed by Sarah's revelation. That explains the tactical proficiency and technical skills. Your performance made perfect sense once you understand the background. Hayes found herself reassessing not just Sarah's individual capabilities, but the broader implications of having a Navy SEAL embedded in her training programs. The opportunities for cross-service learning and capability development were significant, but they would require careful management to respect operational security requirements. Lieutenant Chun, Hayes said formally, I appreciate your disclosure. This information will help us better utilize your expertise while respecting any security considerations related to your background. Sarah nodded appreciation for Hayes' professional approach to the revelation. Ma'am, I'm available to contribute to training programs within the constraints of operational security and my current assignment parameters. The offer opened up possibilities that several Marines immediately began considering. Having access to genuine SEAL expertise could enhance their own training while providing valuable insights into special operations capabilities and methodologies. Chun, Rodriguez said, his tone now reflecting genuine respect. I owe you an apology. We made assumptions about your background that were completely wrong, and we treated you in ways that were unprofessional. Sarah appreciated Rodriguez's direct acknowledgement of the situation, but she was more interested in moving forward constructively than in dwelling on past misunderstandings. Sergeant, assumptions are natural when people are working with limited information. The important thing is what we do moving forward. Torres was still processing the full scope of their error in judgment. So, when we were making jokes about Navy training standards, you were just sitting there listening to us talk shit about stuff you actually do for a living. Sarah's slight smile was the first sign of amusement she had shown since revealing her background. Torres, I've heard worse. Marine confidence isn't exactly unknown in special operations communities. The comment drew nervous laughter from Rodriguez's squad as they began to appreciate the irony of their situation. They had been demonstrating Marine superiority to someone whose actual job involved capabilities that exceeded their own training and experience. Wu was shaking his head in amazement. The obstacle course performance makes so much more sense now. You weren't just fit for a supply officer. You were operating at like 10% capacity. Sarah's nod confirmed Wu's assessment. The course was challenging, but it's similar to obstacles I encounter regularly in training and operations. I was trying to avoid making it look too easy. Her admission that she had been deliberately restraining her performance added another layer of understanding to the Marines' reassessment of the past few days. They were beginning to realize that Sarah had been carefully managing her demonstrations of capability to avoid exactly the kind of questions they had eventually asked. Martinez was studying Sarah with newfound respect and professional curiosity. What's it like being a woman in the SEALs? I mean, if you don't mind talking about it. Sarah appreciated Martinez's interest while recognizing that the question touched on aspects of